and representing District 5 was a great honor when I was elected twice. And for some reason, this feels much more emotional than the other two hard-fought campaigns. And for that, thank you. I raise my hands. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Former council president Deborah Juarez is now a council member again in Seattle in District 5. What role is she going to play, especially as the new leader of the council's housing committee for the next 16 months? And what's the latest in the race for city attorney and perhaps a tighter than expected mayor's race as we approach the primary election? Plus, a delay in appointing members to this city's Renters Commission group. Is one council member hopping mad about this? Is she way off base? Is there something going on behind the scenes? Well, the curtain rises, and here we are in Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host David Croman, who is the City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I got to ask you, my gardening pal, is it just me, or are we experiencing one of the driest summers we've had in a while? I gauge it by how many times I've had to mow the lawn this summer before it turned brown. I'm not even sure I cracked a half dozen mows before the grass fried and died. What are you seeing, man?
Yeah, no, I agree. My measure is how early the blackberries ripen, and it feels like this. Feels like this is about as early as I ever remember. We're eating tomatoes and have been for a few weeks, and all of this stuff I usually expect to come in August. But I think it's so dry and hot. You're right that it's like we live in a different climate right now.
Yeah, I know. I remember when Sunset Magazine had the big news about you're moving up climate zones here. It's like right. It's real, man. It's real. But some of those blackberries are rather tasty. I've had a few myself. All right. Well, thank you, David, as always, for joining me. Thanks to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks to all the patrons of the show. A big shout out to Lab and Eric, always asking interesting questions on Patreon. Appreciate that. I've passed some of those questions on to our council members. Make sure you keep an eye out for that. Does that sound like fun to you, asking those questions? Well, shucks. Become a podcast patron on Patreon. Why don't you? Support levels start at just $5 a month. You get access to patrons first content. You even get your own decal. Very, very cool. We answer your questions on the show. Definitely a ton of fun there. So make sure you check that out. Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Also, you can find this podcast on Converge Media. The video version is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get this party rolling. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Well, David, we've talked about Deborah Juarez joining the council for a few weeks now. I think we were both surprised she put her name in the ring because she had a lot of criticisms about this job when she left, but it was no surprise she ended up getting the position when she actually did submit her name. So my question now, what is she going to bring to the table, especially when it comes to the housing committee she's going to oversee? Do you see her taking on this maybe it'll happen or maybe it won't renter and landlord legislation that Kathy Moore was talking about before she stepped down in early July?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the landlord tenant legislation had been in conversation for at least a year, so a really long time. So there's a long history there. It sounds like before Councilmember Moore had stepped down, those had kind of fallen apart in that office over a kind of couple key disagreements. So, it's not exactly as easy as just kind of, passing off the paperwork and picking up where Councilmember Moore left off. And so, I think if this was maybe somebody newer who might be a little more apt to just kind of pick up where the person they're replacing had left off, maybe they would, start having those conversations. I think Councilmember Juarez, because she's so experienced, probably has some notion of what she wants to accomplish in a year and a half or whatever it's going to be that she's here. I don't know if that includes the landlord tenant legislation. She voted on a lot of these things and to help enact them in the first place.
Right.
And it's also going to be a busy time for her. So really it's just a question of priority. So I guess that's a long way of saying I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
But it would be a difficult legislative lift. And so it would have to be a priority of hers to do that, which it might be. I just need the answer to that.
Right. When you talk about the timing, you're absolutely right. We're just a couple of weeks away from budget discussions really going full bore for the council here at committee meetings, essentially being taken off the table here. So yeah, if she doesn't have a plan coming in for some of these things like renter and landlord legislation, it'd be difficult to squeeze that in at least this year. Again, her term lasts for 16 months. So we'll see what she will be able to do. I did want to ask though, where else do you see Deborah Juarez making an impact? Because there are some big votes ahead for the council on revamping the business and occupation tax, for example. This is the Seattle Shield measure. It's in the budget committee again this week. This is the proposal to restructure the B&O tax, so many smaller businesses would pay less or no B&O tax. Larger revenue businesses would pay a bit more. So this is a measure Councilmember Rink on the more progressive side of the council and Mayor Harrell are supportive. He's definitely not further on that side. They're talking about this. They both are. And there are 17 amendments to sort through that I've looked at here. I know there's a lot to poke through here, David, but how do you see Councilmember Juarez taking a role in that or maybe other legislation the council is considering?
Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't a guarantee, or it's not a guarantee that this proposal ever makes it to the ballot because the council has to vote to put it on the ballot. I suspect it will. I've heard Councilmember Rivera told me that she was probably going to vote to put it on the ballot. And so if she's going that direction, I would imagine there are enough votes to do it eventually. So
let the voters decide, basically.
Yeah. So, it might not be as key of a vote. Councilmember Juarez's vote might not be as key as it maybe previously thought, but it is significant. It is sort of a politically tricky vote to take and requires a bit of interrogating. I know some of the council members were frustrated by how quickly it was being unrolled.
Right.
And if they want it to be on the November ballot, they have to vote it at a committee on Wednesday and approve it on Tuesday because they have to do it before the primary. And so that will be a pretty quick vote that she's going to have to take.
Yeah.
And then, the other piece, and we've talked about this, which is Councilmember Moore was really the most skeptical of Mayor Bruce Harrell's growth plan.
Yes.
Particularly the neighborhood residential centers that he has proposed. Councilmember Juarez she has a track record of voting for the upzones that came with over the last decade or so. And
sure.
And in the interview process says that she supports adding or even expanding the neighborhood center. So that could be a change. I think the devil there is going to be in the details.
Oh, yeah.
But I early indications make me think that she's going to be a little more open to some of the proposed density plans in Mayor Harrell's plan than Councilmember Moore was. So that is a big piece of that. And then, of course, some district specific stuff. What is she going to do around Aurora? How much work is she going to do there? I don't know, because that was a big priority of Councilmember Moore's. So, and as we know about Councilmember Juarez, she's very district
focused. Absolutely. Yeah. A lot still ahead there. Again, a 16-month term, but I know she's going to be coming in with a lot of talk and a lot of action there from Councilmember Juarez. So I did want to move on to something happening with the mayor's race here. I asked you last week about this Northwest Progressive Institute or NPI poll. There's one that came out in May that showed Katie Wilson with a 36 to 33% lead over Bruce Harrell. I know you didn't put a lot of stock in that. That was kind of early on, but now we've got this new NPI poll that shows kind of a statistical tie still. We're talking 33% for Harrell, 31% for Wilson. You were writing about this recently in the Times. This might tell us a little bit more closer to the primary here. I know we're talking about 27% of the 651 people polled. They weren't sure about this, but what did this newer poll tell you about what's going on, David?
Yeah, I mean, there are two ways to look at it, which is the first is that Bruce Harrell's not running away with this race. People know who he is. I think his name recognition was, I think only 8% or something had never heard of him. So he's pretty well known, and even still is only getting 30-ish% of people saying that they're going to vote for him.
Yeah, a statistical tie here, basically.
Right, and so I think on the one hand that is, if I'm Mayor Harrell, I'm a little nervous about that because it suggests that people are not saying that they're going to vote for him, even though they do know who he is. Whereas Katie Wilson has pretty much the same level of support, and yet a huge number of people still don't even really know who she is. So you can make the argument she has a lot more to gain than he might. At the same time, because she is so unknown, I do think that gives Harrell a pretty big opportunity to define her as they want, which they're trying to do it already, as she is a 2020 era backer of defunding the police and friend of Shama Sawant, and you don't want to go back to that. Which is all to say, I I think this poll is interesting because it doesn't show that this is a slam dunk for Bruce Harrell, as I
Yep.
think a lot of people maybe assumed it was over the course of 2025.
Hmm.
It also, but the major takeaway for me is that this could truly swing either direction, and I wouldn't be particularly surprised because of just how many people still haven't made up their mind.
Yeah, and the fundraising is very equal for both of them. So there's definitely a lot ahead. We'll see what happens with the numbers next week in the primary. I did want you to touch on the city attorney's race if you could, because you wrote about this as well. Incumbent Ann Davison led in the NPI poll, 31% to 18% for Erica Evans. And then a whopping 40% of the people out there said they were unsure. What's drawing your attention in this election? What are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, city attorney is always going to be pretty big on sure numbers because I think it's just not something people think about that often. I think most people don't even really know what it does. Um, so that didn't surprise me. The big question that and I think a lot of other people are asking is, can Ann Davison repeat her success from 2021?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people view her election as sort of a electoral quirk,
Hmm.
which is that Pete Holmes, the successor, or her predecessor, was squeezed out in sort of weird, a weird primary election in which he
Hmm.
kind of perfectly had two people on either side of him politically that stole just barely enough of his vote to
Right.
squeeze him out. I think the general assumption is Davison probably would have lost if Holmes had made it to the general election, but
Okay.
as it were, she, was facing off against a police abolitionist who had some pretty inflammatory social media posts,
Yeah.
and so that was enough to help her win.
Yeah.
Now the question is, has she kind of endeared herself enough to Seattle and the kind of change that has happened under her watch that people are going to look past the Republican piece of her
Yeah.
identity, which she tries to distance herself from, but it is real, and a rewarder with another term.
Hmm.
31%, that's about what she got in the primary the first time around. So you have to assume that is the number of people in Seattle who are sort of dyed in the wool and
Yeah.
Davison supporters. It's just whether or not once you get to the general, they look at somebody like Erica Evans, who is quite qualified, I would
Hmm.
say, much more qualified and kind of polished than Nicole Thomas Kennedy was. She's
Right.
career prosecutor,
Yep.
worked for Nick Brown as a U.S. attorney. So this is not the same candidate that she faced in 2021. This
Right.
is somebody who's a little more formidable, but now she has perhaps the advantage of incumbency, and so it's which one is stronger.
Yeah, we'll see. And then again, 40% of the people saying they weren't quite sure. There's a lot of swing going on here, and we'll definitely see what happens when the primary results come in next week. So definitely looking closely at that. Thank you for that, David. All right, coming up here, a look at a rare missed vote in the city council regarding the renters commission here. What happened? What's going on behind the scenes? Why is one council member more than a little upset about this? More on this next on Now Hear This. Okay, this doesn't happen a lot on the council, very, very rarely. But last week, the council's Housing and Human Services Committee didn't have a quorum, meaning not enough council members showed up to have a vote. This was supposed to be the meeting where the council confirmed the appointments of 14 Renters Commission members. And while Council President Nelson had an excused absence, Councilmember Saka, who would have made up that 3-member quorum, he did not. He said he wouldn't be there 5 minutes before the meeting, had an emergency, leaving Councilmember Rink to say, something is not right here.
I'm disappointed that we're unable to take action today. Losing quorum 5 minutes before a meeting feels suspect.
Now, I should point out at this week's council briefing, Councilmember Saka apologized, said it was a family emergency. No subterfuge at all going on here. Councilmember Solomon, who was presiding at this committee meeting last week, accepted that apology. Councilmember Rink didn't even address Councilmember Saka in her remarks. So I guess we're going to kind of leave that where it was. But David, you reported on this last week. The root of the concern here was an email that former Councilmember Moore was trying to send to everyone on the committee, except for Councilmember Rink, as I saw it here. And that email was a request to delay the vote on confirming these commissioners. Can you try to piece this together for us here?
Yeah, so I'll zoom out to say we don't usually think this hard about commissions, if we're being honest. There are a lot of them. Their influence on city politics is questionable, and they tend to perhaps not have as much influence as some people might assume that they do. And so there's that piece. So we don't usually cover
But to
these
point out,
commission votes,
David and I love committee meetings. I just want to throw that out there. But
yes.
please keep going. Yes.
Yeah. This one, though, it's just interesting because it gets at that piece we were just talking about, which is there is a pretty hot debate in City Hall right now about what to do with landlord-tenant regulations. Affordable housing industry is struggling. A lot of people think that it's partly to blame, that the city's landlord-tenant regulations are partly to blame. We talked about Kathy Moore working on some of this stuff before she left. And so, this question, while the Renters Commission in and of itself is perhaps not the most important thing in the world, the fight over what it represents, I think, tells a bigger story about some of the debates happening in City Hall right now. And so,
and who it represents, renters, landlords. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Because Kathy Moore had wanted to add landlords to that commission. Of course, some pushback from renter advocates. And so, when with the perception that Councilmember Moore, despite her resignation, is still pushing her colleagues to kind of delay this vote, and the perception that they're avoiding doing something a little uncomfortable, which is not confirming these Renters Commission people by just not showing up to the vote.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of smacks of gamesmanship in City Hall, which I think is frustrating to the people who care about this stuff, not to mention the commissioners who showed up.
Right.
Whether or not Kathy Moore's email was the reason for this delay, you can't draw that causation because, well, first of all, she told me that her email to Mark Solomon bounced back.
Mm-hmm.
Council President Nelson said she never saw it. And former Councilmember Moore said, she never heard back from anybody. So it's hard to say whether her urging them to delay is the reason for that delay. Councilmember Saka says he had a family emergency.
Right.
He was, I should point out, in the building at the time when this vote happened. So, again, it just has the kind of trappings of like a sort of using the process to achieve policy gains, which I think is frustrating to people. But they're going to vote on these commissioners
on Tuesday, right? Mm-hmm.
On Tuesday today. Yeah. So, we may look back on this as just kind of a momentary dust up that we won't think much about. But, I do think it kind of gets at the larger political dynamics and issues being talked about in City Hall right now.
Right. Yeah. I was trying to figure out, is this kind of a no harm, no foul type situation, having this actually on the docket as it was supposed to be on Tuesday? Do you see any lasting effects from this? That was my final question on this.
I think if there is a lasting effect, it sort of previews how difficult these conversations are around landlord and tenant stuff.
Okay.
We saw some of that ethics bill,
right?
Sort of, which was perceived to be paving the way for a vote on rewriting the city's landlord tenant regulations. And so here again, we have the Renters Commission, which is, it is what it is. It exists for a reason, but it's not, the end all be all of Seattle politics. But even that is sort of finding itself at the center of this controversy around what should the city's relationship be to regulating how landlords rent their buildings. And I think that's a really big and important debate. And the fact that we're having this already over just renters commissions appointments kind of shows, again, the tricky politics of all this stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to move on to a piece of national news that's drawn plenty of local reaction here, an executive order from President Trump that essentially calls for punishment when it comes to people living outside, plus forced treatment for people with behavioral health or addiction issues, and an end to housing first policy, where people are brought inside first, then encouraged to deal with whatever issues they have. A lot of local pushback on this, as I mentioned. And David, your colleague Greg Kim was writing about this. The mayor, Governor Ferguson, a number of local service providers say this is a backwards concept. It goes against data-driven, proven results here. Republican leaders say the housing first approach enables addiction and other problems. Visible homelessness, of course, was a big talking point on the Trump campaign trail, and here we are. How do you look at this executive order, David? Because I'm seeing King County, which gets about $66 million a year in federal homelessness grants. So is this something that local providers are going to have to get in line with? Do they keep on pushing back? What do you make of this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think with Trump, it's difficult sometimes for local folks to separate the person from the reality of the actual executive order. I heard this very good interview with Lisa Dugard on Erica Barnett and Sandy Kaushik's Seattle Nice podcast. They had her on, and she was arguing, and I defer to her because she has been kind of out in front of a lot of harm reduction and housing first policy debates, and
Yeah.
she was saying, if you actually read the executive order,
Mhm.
she thinks it's written in a way that really isn't going to have the kind of sky falling effect that some
Yeah.
people think it will. That um, basically what they're saying is, any harm reduction that only encourages illegal drug use without providing any sort of follow-up care,
Yes.
or any kind of housing first policies that do nothing to help people in that position, that should be illegal. Her argument is that A, that's not happening, and B, if that is happening, um, I agree essentially that shouldn't be happening.
Okay. Okay.
And so that was, I thought, an interesting take, which is that some of the bluster around this executive order might actually be more significant than the legal wording contained within it. I
Okay.
do think it sounds like it does have some implications for folks' ability to pass out, say, like clean needles
Yeah.
or um, drug paraphernalia as part of a harm reduction effort.
Hmm.
But beyond that, as to whether it upends the entire system, again, I'm not an expert in this, but I will defer to Lisa, who
Yeah.
I think is smart on this stuff, obviously, who seems to be arguing not only is it not a particularly necessarily impactful executive order, there might actually be some value in it, that maybe there comes some money behind some of the stuff for involuntary commitment. So I don't know, it's asking a lot for nuance sometimes from
Yeah.
the Trump administration.
Yeah.
But I think it is not immediately obvious that this executive order necessarily upends the way that Seattle and King County do business.
Yeah, I saw that bit too from Lisa Dugard, who is the co-executive director of Purpose Dignity Action. PDA does a lot of work in the housing first space. And so I guess that's my question. Where is that? It's one of those devil in the detail type things, meaning what does this executive order actually say when it comes to changing the laws of our state, or our response to it? The one piece that I was looking at too was this idea of, Washington State already has laws over involuntary commitment. So potentially this wouldn't have a major impact on that front either. So I guess it's really difficult for me to get past, and maybe for a lot of people, to get past that political bluster, of which there is plenty in the Trump administration, and get down to what is actually going to get done. I guess that's what Lisa was talking about, and what you're kind of getting at too.
Yeah, I mean, because you can put all the big scary words that you want in an executive order or a piece of legislation, particularly in the kind of introductory paragraphs where they say, because blue cities are, falling apart, and because, it sounds really big and scary, but it really, the only thing that actually matters is the wording of the executive order itself.
Yeah.
And my sense is, from looking at it and from hearing other people talk about it, there is a lot of wiggle room built into the wording there, which is a
Yeah.
lot of if this or may this or, and that is a much different, any lawyer you talk to will say, that provides a lot of room for maneuvering. Lisa was making the argument that whoever wrote this is doing this intentionally, that they actually are doing this with an eye to give folks like her organization some wiggle room on this. And I thought, again, I thought that was really interesting, because
Yeah.
it is easy, particularly in Seattle. There's so much antipathy toward Donald Trump. There is the assumption that everything coming from him equals something bad. That might still be the case, because there is sort of the implementation question, and
Right.
we know that there isn't, from this federal administration, necessarily a lot of allegiance to the words that have been written on a piece of paper.
Or laws of any kind. Yeah, keep going.
But I thought it was a good point that the executive order itself does not necessarily guarantee a major strong reaction from the federal government towards how Seattle operates.
It's going to be so interesting to watch that play out. I think you're right, though. You got to look past the whereas section and move on to the be it resolved then part, and figure out what's going on. So thank you for that. And a really good discussion on Seattle Nice about that, folks, if you want to check it out from last week. All right, coming up, does the council need a rules change on public comment? Well, I'm sorry we're not taking any public comment on that, but we do need to talk about it. Coming up here on What's Next. Well, the council has a few other issues going on this week aside from bringing on a new member. David, I just saw this news. There's a new proposal for Denny Blaine Park, that informal nude beach on the east side of Seattle. It sounds like there's a proposal to put up some dividers for a nude area and a not nude area. Quick take on that. Is that going to work? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't get to this yesterday. I just wrote a story about it for today. It's the neighbors say it's not enough. This is Seattle sort of trying to thread the needle between, saying, looking like they're doing something about while trying to preserve this as a naked beach. I do think it's interesting how strong of a stance Seattle has taken on preserving this park as a nude beach.
Yeah.
Perhaps stronger than I was expecting them to, but they're sort of sticking their neck out and really fighting hard to keep Denny Blaine a nude beach. So, kind of interesting.
Yeah, keep Denny Blaine naked. We'll see how those signs come out. At any rate, I did want to get to Councilmember Strauss's proposal to change council rules such that there was a different structure to public comment. So right now, the rules say 20 minutes at the meetings. The chair of the meeting can call for more time and can decide if everyone gets 1 minute or 2 minutes worth of commentary. Councilmember Strauss says he wants to simplify things. He wants to say public comment time will be an hour or less. Let's blow past that 20-minute thing. If there are fewer than 30 speakers, everybody gets 2 minutes. If there are 30 or more, then everyone gets a minute. I think I see what he's trying to do to make things more predictable, but is the rest of the council going to buy in? What do you think about this? Because I've said for a long time, and I think a lot of other people have too, our public comment system within the council is challenging. It's really challenging. I'm not going to say broken just yet, but it's really challenging. What do you make of what Councilmember Strauss is trying to do here?
Yeah, I mean, it's rare that they actually, if there is more than 20 minutes of public comment, it's rare that they actually cap it at 20 minutes. I think he's trying to formalize it. It's a little hard for me to not see anything that Councilmember Strauss does as anything but a dig at Council President Nelson.
Yeah, right, right.
I think it is a little bit of a dig at Council President Nelson because, the last time in past when she has tried to enforce that cap, it has sort of led to chaos and people shouting at her and stuff. So
sure,
I think he is trying to sort of take some power out of her hands in a way. But that's the cynical view. The more probably rational view is it's just a little bit of a free fall usually, and he's trying to formalize it. I don't know what the impact of making this change exactly would be because, like I said, it's there sort of generally is a way that things are done, which is they extend it. I guess it is sort of right now very person dependent, whether or not, how long people get to talk for and how many people get to talk. And this would kind of take the power out of the council president's hand.
Yeah, I know, and try to formalize it a little bit. Do you have any thoughts about this? I always try to wrap my head around this. Is there a better way to do public comment for Seattle City Council such that it doesn't turn into a circus of sorts, or do we just let it be a circus and that's what's up?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I haven't spent enough time in other city halls or municipal governments to know how other people do it.
Yeah, you've been watching what we do in the shadows too much, but keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It does feel like it gets out of hand sometimes. But there's also something kind of beautiful about the chaos of it, which is, democracy in action, baby.
Yeah. Yeah. That's city government for you. All right. Well, David, it is time to wrap up. We are recording this podcast just before the Major League Baseball trade deadline of July 31st. So what does your crystal ball say? Are the M's going to make another big move like they did to land a new first baseman, and Josh Naylor? Looks like he's doing okay. What say you? Any more action from the M's? What do you got?
I'm just stealing reporting from my sports colleagues. I feel like they're going to go for a big relief pitcher and then maybe a slightly less high profile bat or infielder not named Eugenio Suarez. Is my guess.
Yeah, because they'd have to pay him bucks. This is going to be so interesting to watch the next couple of days here. But you don't
kind of
think
my favorite time of the year. I love the trade deadline.
It is. It always kind of puts it under the microscope. So nothing different at third base. You're saying don't need a big change there.
Well, I think we do need a big change. I don't know if they can afford a big change. I think they might get somebody who can split time there.
Okay.
With their current guy. I would like them to go get Eugenio Suarez, but I don't know if they're going to want to pay the price.
I know. And then he got hit by a pitch and everyone's like, wait a minute, now what happens? Anyway, there's so many things to look into here. I can't wait to see what happens in the next 48 hours. Well, thank you, David, as always, for helping us solve all the problems of the world, including those that are baseball related. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. If you want to be a patron, go for it. Why don't you? Please consider a pledge of $5 a month or more on Patreon to be a on Patreon to be a patron. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you are listening. We are there. Thanks for watching on Converge Media too. See you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2020.